here we are together with Isabel Losada. We are here talking about her new book that's just recently come out in November, and it's called Sensation, Adventures in Sex, Love and Laughter. Okay, so tell me, Isabel, you've been writing for the past 10 years or so on happiness and spirituality. Why the departure into writing about sex?
Well, yes. Well, as you say, it's actually, I dread to say it, but it's 19 years I've been writing books. And yes, they're all about happiness. And what I did where I started, as you might remember, the best known book, which is the Battersea Park Road to Enlightenment.
Yes, yes.
What I did in that is I went to do all the weird and wonderful courses that you can do out there on every level to attempt to explore happiness and to write about my experiences within them. Not to make fun of the different disciplines, but usually to make fun of my own expectations about what I thought the disciplines would be. And then inevitably I was wrong. You know, I learned to eat humble pie, even when they were run by Americans from California. You know, I still found I learned something. So, and then I looked at In for Tibet with Love, the book where I had the privilege of meeting His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Then I was looking at service to the world around us as you know, the main thing that we can do to be happy, obviously, to make a difference to others. And then so I've looked at all these different aspects of happiness, but I'm a little bit slow, Claire. And so finally I kind of worked out that looking at the lives of my friends, what seemed to give them most happiness or grief was either the lack of a significant other in their lives or the presence of a significant other in their lives, both of which will cause a great happiness or unhappiness. But for those that do have a relationship, at the center of that relationship is a bedroom, and at the center of the bedroom is a bed. Yeah. And if what happens in that bed is loving and warm and nourishing, then their whole level of happiness is nourished, and the relationship is nourished, the intimacy is nourished, the family is nourished, the street therefore is nourished because you've got a happy family, and everything extends from there. Whereas if it goes wrong in that central point of intimacy and that key relationship starts to break down, that, in my experience, is a major factor in people being happy or unhappy. And then I was challenged by someone who said, well, if you supposedly write about the mind, the body and the spirit, and you've done it from all these different positions, how come, puns intended, how come you've never written about sex? And I thought, well, yes, it's fair comment because, excuse me, a little bit of cold. It's fair comment because the body, this news just out, in the MBS world has become to be about yoga classes and diet and nutrition and exercise and nourishment and what we feed it. But really, sex isn't really spoken about, even in the spiritual realms. So much so that I spoke to a very well-known spiritual person this morning who does events, and I offered to come and do an event for them, and they said, well, it would have to have a spiritual ingredient. And I thought, hold on a minute, sex would have to have a spiritual ingredient. Does sex by its nature not have a spiritual ingredient? You know, I mean, if a flower has a spiritual ingredient, and a cat has a spiritual ingredient, and the air and the sea have spiritual ingredients, surely sexuality, the source of life itself, must by its nature have a spiritual ingredient.
Yeah.
But apparently not, because even in the MBS world, these two things have come to be separated. And so I thought it was well overdue. And also I thought, sorry, long answer to your first question.
That's okay.
It is true that when you look around the spiritual world, if you ask who are the leading spiritual teachers that we think of, well, I mean, we might think of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, we might think of Thich Nhat Hanh, we might pick your own favorites, but most of them are either celibate or married but never talk about sex. So when you start to go into the subject area, you soon find out why that's the case, because it's really complex area. You know, it's a bit like walking into a hornet's nest.
Yeah.
Because of people's assumptions and people's fears. And But having said that, it's been an amazing year. I mean, what I did is I used the premise that I use in Battersea Park Road to Enlightenment, and I just went and took all the courses that I could find to help me understand more about sexuality and more about what makes sex into good sex in the context of a long-term, loving, monogamous relationship.
Yeah, because most people, if they do think about sex within the mind, body, and spirit field, they will think about tantric, the tantric traditions. That's the one thing they might think of. Yeah. But actually, there's so much more out there that you experienced, isn't there?
Well, it's an interesting area. What comes under the umbrella of Tantra? And I mean, what comes under what they would call neo-tantra, and people that run their courses and call them tantric, and people that run courses and avoid calling them tantric. I mean, it was very funny because at one point, because I took courses from different traditions, each course I went on had a different name for what is between a woman's legs, because of course, as everyone says, we've never come up with a satisfactory name that pleases everyone. So there are many different schools of thought. I mean, having said that, you know, I would say that it's all good. And when, having taught for many years about the comfort zone and about expanding our comfort zone, which is, you know, a well-known belief in the MBS world.
Yes, of course.
You can't then go, oh, I don't know about this, I'm not comfortable with this. You know, I want to embrace the idea of exploring my comfort zone as long as I'm comfortable with it.
Yeah.
But, you know, if it's something that I'm not comfortable about, then I'll keep away from that. So, but it was a wonderful year. I mean, I started off with women's workshops. And I've always been a bit frightened of women's workshops in any tradition. I always find groups of women together slightly intimidating because they don't mess about. Men are actually quite gentle in those, but when you've got a group of women together, it's like, okay, let's cut the nonsense, let's get to the jugular, you know, let's do the work here.
Yes.
So I'm a bit frightened of all women groups. But sorry.
Very funny and irreverent biography, really, of your experience in that period, and I laughed a lot.
Thank you.
But it's also very revealing. I mean, it's one thing in like the Battersea Park Road to Enlightenment, you went on workshops and you shared those experiences, but this is much more intimate, and the stuff that you're sharing is very intimate. Was it hard to be so frank? I mean, did you found it hard to include all this stuff in the book?
It was enormously hard. It was enormously hard. I mean, but after 20 years writing, I know that if there was a section I balk at, then that's probably where it's going to be most powerful. For example, we were just talking about, I mean, in the women's workshop, if you go on any workshop to do with sexuality, that's an all women's workshop, you know, I'm sure they won't mind me sharing this with you, but, you know, taking your clothes off is basically a minimum requirement. You do have to be able to stand up in your birthday suit in front of other women and not be ashamed of your body, which, you know, you think, well, how hard can it be for us just to celebrate our birthday suits the way children would? And yet that's enormously difficult for women, regardless of the shape that we are, you know, and you get women there with absolutely so perfect bodies according to what society requires, and they of course are more ashamed of their bodies for some ridiculous reason.
Yes.
And women who are obese and have 3 children and have got bits hanging here, there and everywhere, and I mean, so it makes no difference what shape we are. That's minimum requirement, really. And then similarly, there's the difficult matter of how we feel about what's between our legs, and somehow women have had it brainwashed into us. Heaven knows where this has come from, but there's a normal, and usually whatever we think normal is, we each think that we are not that normal. We are somehow not that. And I had to put my hand up when we got to this part of the workshop and literally think back to my teenage years and try and work out how it was I decided that my labia were not whatever normal is. And I thought, can I really write about how I feel about my labia in a book that's public? And then I thought, well, if I can't do this, then who can? Who's going to? You know, and we know that labiaplasty is now the fastest growing form of cosmetic surgery, because there are so many women that think their bits aren't normal. And, you know, this just out, girls, I mean, our bits are as diverse as our faces are and as beautiful as our faces are. And there is no normal, you know, I mean, show me a normal face. I mean, it doesn't exist. And so, and, you know, and this is chapter 1 of the book.
Exactly.
So these are some of the things that I was looking at in the very first section of the book, the women's workshop. And so then, yes, I mean, I think if you're writing in this way, then courage is required. And I do know that whenever I hit something that was really painful, there was going to be some woman reading it who would have thought, oh God, that's true about me, you know. And so that's the gift one has as a writer, is being able to speak right to the soul of the person who's reading.
Exactly.
So I wanted to do that, as well as to make people laugh. And
I'm just gonna... So, I mean, it takes huge courage to overcome inhibitions and insecurities to do something like that. And you did it because you had a purpose in mind in terms of the book. But for some women, they may not feel they have enough courage to do that. Do you think that you can get to where you've got to without doing all the different workshops? Can you do the work as a couple on your own?
Well, I think reading Sensation is a good start, because like all my books, you get to do it vicariously through me. You get to think, oh my God, I could never do that, for example.
Yes.
But if say you're reading, just to take the first example again, say you're reading about me reaching a stage where I'm able to be naked in front of other women. I mean, if you're thinking to yourself, well, I wouldn't have any trouble with that, then you know that you don't have work to do in that area. If you think to yourself, never in a million years could I stand naked in a room with other women, then you have to ask yourself, well, why not?
Yes.
Why have I got these issues with my body that I wouldn't be able to stand proudly in my birthday suit and go, you know, here I am.
Yes.
And so a lot of work can be done just by thinking and reflecting on the content of the book.
That's definitely one of the strengths.
As I go through it, my hope is that as women read Sensation, they can each think, well, I could do this. I wouldn't want to do this, but I maybe could do this. Or I can discuss this with my partner. Or I can, you know, we can consider this aspect or that aspect. Yeah. I know I had a wonderful letter from a couple in their 60s that were reading the book alternate nights out loud to each other and using it for communication. To read it and talk about it. And I thought I was so proud of that.
Yes, that's wonderful. I do think throughout when I was reading it, you do find yourself, there are questions, you know, you find yourself thinking, ooh, could I do that? Yeah. Ooh, how would my significant other react if I suggested that to him? So it raises those questions that you might not think about had you not seen your experience. I mean, I did.
That's my hope. That's my hope. Just like with some of my other books, people have gone off, and I mean, I'm always amazed. For example, with Battersea Park Road to Enlightenment, people read it and then they write to me and they're gone, "Oh, I've gone to triclonic irrigation," and I'm thinking, for heaven's sake, out of all the things I've written about, you're choosing that one. Like Vipassana meditation. When people write to me to say they've gone to do the 10-day Vipassana retreat, after I say how much I hated it, I was like, "Well, good for you. I admire you." But I mean, with this one. I mean, I'm already getting letters from people who are trying various things. But I mean, the one thing I would say is find a way forward.
Yeah.
You know, if you're in a relationship, you or anyone who's listening to this, I don't mean you personally, I mean obviously the listeners. If you're in a relationship and you haven't had sex for 5 years and you've decided that either you're irretrievably broken or your partner is irretrievably broken, that's just not true. Nobody is beyond redemption. And I believe that very strongly.
That's interesting, because that is one of the...
Yeah, sorry.
That is one of the questions I was going to ask you. You know, there are many women who've had a lifetime of joyless sex.
Yes.
And
the majority, I think.
Is it ever too late to
No. No. As long as we have breath and we have skin. This is why the book is called Sensation, because it's about sensation in the body. I mean, there are a number of myths out there that have ruined sex for everybody. Obviously one of them is through the porn industry, that, women think unless they're able to imitate the Oscar-winning performances of the porn actresses, that they're somehow not screaming and thrashing around and preferably having multiple orgasms simultaneous to the very moment that their husband happens to be having them. And it's all just like in a movie, literally, that somehow their sex life isn't working. Well, I mean, that's ruined so many experiences.
Done a lot of damage, I would say.
Sorry?
That's done a lot of damage for everyone, hasn't it?
It has. And then on top of that, you've got what's even made it even worse after that is the 50 Shades phenomenon, that basically lets all women know that, if your sex isn't working but you're not prepared to be tied up for 3 hours with an intricate series of Japanese knots and hung upside down, then basically you're really suppressed, And if you're not into partner swapping, then there's really something wrong with you. No. None of this is true. And so, I've got a lot to say here. I'm jumping up and down, desperately trying to say to people, no, there's enough just with you and the person that you love.
Yes.
But we need to start from a point of real honesty. One of the problems that goes wrong in the bedroom is women are very codependent. You won't be unsurprised to hear me tell you this. And so we are used to making signals to our lover. I mean, I'm not talking about faking orgasms, although obviously many women do. I'm just talking about exaggerating the signs of pleasure that we're feeling, whether it's moaning or thrashing our arms around or whatever it is we do, to reassure him. And as soon as you start going down that path, then eventually a woman is going to rebel against her own deception, both of him and of herself. And she's going to say, enough of this, because the truth is she's not feeling the sensation that she's indicating that she's feeling.
Yes.
And so the man is lost because he's not getting any real feedback, and the woman is lost because she doesn't know how to give any real feedback. And so then what you get then is you get a breakdown in communication, and then the only way out of this is for the man to go and have an affair and to have some woman who seemingly wants his attention, or the woman to go and have an affair so that she can check that she's not broken. And the only path that she knows out, that most people know out of couples, is to go and have affairs. And many couples don't want to have affairs because they love their partners.
Yes.
Or now they think they've got to somehow miraculously develop an interest in bondage, which some people are not interested in.
Yes.
So what I hope I'm offering with Sensation is a whole other pathway that then connects with the tantric tradition, which is part of the spiritual tradition, and to find ways that these can be weaved through, because of course within tantra there is a wonderful tradition of sexuality and spirituality coming together, but on the whole it's not explored, it's not even spoken about.
Yes, I was just saying that you talk in the book about connection, and that's what good sex, if you want to use that expression, often is to do with connection.
Yes.
And if you're actually pretending how
Yes.
well you're enjoying the experience, then that's not a true basis for connection.
Either with yourself or with your partner. And I mean, one of the things that there are many things that I discuss in the book. And one of them, I mean, if we start with connection with self in that context, I met this tantric master who spoke to me very, very helpfully for me. He used a phrase about listening to sensation. And I think in the past, I'd had a tendency to sort of try and be aware of sensation in a generic way. And it's very easy even if you're having a back massage, for example, it's very easy to let your mind wander. And suddenly you're thinking about what you forgot to do yesterday or what you're going to be doing tomorrow. And you're not really listening to the sensation in the body. And he was really quite harsh. He said to me, listen, if I'm massaging you and you're thinking about something else, it's a bit as if I'm trying to talk to you and you're on the phone to someone else. He said, It's rude. Keep your listening onto the sensation. And in that sense, it's very like meditation. If you're being touched and massaged and you find that your mind has wandered off, Don't be crossed by the fact that your mind's wandered off. Just bring it back gently to experiencing the sensation. And then it wanders off again, and then bring it back to experience it. And there you get the connection to the sensation in the body. And it's really interesting then to be able to really feel what brings sensation and what doesn't. Now, it was very hard for me to admit to my partner, even after a year exploring all this, it was hard for me to say to him, darling, you know, when we reach the penetrative part of what we're doing, the sensation levels in my body are going down, not up. I know for you they're going up, but for me they're going down. But I mean, we had to talk about sensation for a year before I could get those words to come out of my mouth. Because obviously it's not what the man thinks and expects.
No.
He thinks this is the icing on the cake. And for many women, it isn't the icing on the cake. It's the bit where you start to think about the fact the ceiling needs painting or what you're going to do for the shopping tomorrow. You know, so...
But do you think men are more honest in sexual relationships than women then? Do they find it easier to articulate what it is that they like or want to achieve the sensation that we all want to have than women?
No, I think it's too general. I don't think one can speak about the whole of mankind in one breath. I mean, I think obviously, I think that the thing is that on the physical level, men's arousal level is often easier to raise and becomes stronger sooner. And so then what happens is the man loses his connection with his experience of the woman's arousal level. He might be aware of where he feels that she is initially, but then his arousal is going to rise, and then he's going to be so carried away with the intensity of his own sensation that he'll then lose his connection with her and leave her behind, if you like.
Yeah. But in terms of talking about it, do you think that women struggle in particular because we're so keen to please?
Yes. I would say most women. I mean, that's like saying, how many women do you know that want to please the men in their lives? Well, I mean, all women that have men in their lives that they love want to please them. And they certainly want to look after their fragile ego. I don't mean ego in a bad way in this context. I mean their sense of self, yes, in terms of their lovemaking and their dignity. And women are very conscious of looking after the man in that context, and quite rightly. But then that's where, to move on to the next workshop, that's where communication, I mean, the next workshop that my partner and I went on was a couples workshop, and that's where you begin to explore communication. Like for me, there's an exercise in one of the things I did where here's something I can just give away to the listeners, is that in the couples workshop we were taught the importance of learning to use 3 words: no, yes, and wait. Wow. When I look at 7 years of my marriage, I realized I'd never really learned to have what the couples workshop teachers call a clear no. I never, an authentic no, that's right. I didn't have an authentic no. So if my husband wanted to make love to me and I wasn't really in the mood, I wouldn't say no, because I didn't want to reject him. Now, because we don't do sex workshops and we don't have a tradition of learning about sexuality for older and wiser women. No woman ever taught me when I was in my 20s, darling, if you don't learn to say no, you can never really say yes. Yeah. And the man never really knows when he's got a real yes if he doesn't have a clear no. And then again, you see the codependency. Why am I not saying no? I'm not saying no because I don't want to upset him. I don't want him to feel rejected. And so I'm going against myself. I mean, not in a serious way. I'm not talking about rape or anything. I'm just talking about on a time when I might want to say no and I'd say yes anyway. Mm-hmm. So having an authentic no is really important so that you can have a yes. And the man, I mean, we're not even able to get that far in clear communication. So realizing that, I was thinking, oh my God, I've never, because also if you're able to say no clearly to a man, you're also giving him the respect of leaving him there, let him deal with it. You know, let him say, all right, she said no, let him grow up a bit, let him deal with that. And then of course there's the question of the word wait, which, pardon me,
Bless you.
Oh, Nicole Dado, the American teacher of sexuality, rather amusingly says that the whole of her years of teaching can basically be summed up to men with the phrase "slow the fuck down." Excuse my swearing, but you know, basically a lot of what we need to say to men is wait. So those 3 words are a really good start in terms of communication with the man, and even those are hard. Even those I personally found hard. Even though here I am, this strong, independent, you know, best-selling author, blah, 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 blah. I'm fine, I'm confident in the world. Put me on stage in front of 5,000 people, I'm happy. But put me in bed with a man I love, and I can't get simple words like no, yes, or wait to come out of my mouth.
So do you think it's important perhaps for women who find themselves in these situations to be along a path of consciousness about who they are and being happy with themselves before they then start work on their sexuality and dealing with the egos in a good sense of themselves and their partners? Do we have to do self-work first?
Goodness. How many 1,000 hours do we have to unpack all the words that we've used in that question? I mean, you know, what?
It's a tricky one, wasn't it?
No, well, I mean, I know what you mean, but I would say that sexuality is itself a path, and the women on the tantric path would say that this is another path to consciousness and to self-knowing and to knowing who we are. And I mean, yes, we need to understand that we are not the body. We are consciousness, as the listeners to this program know very well. We are not the identity. We are not the personality. Of course, anyone that reads Kindred Spirit magazine knows that. You read Tolly, or you read Muji, or you read any of the great spiritual masters, and you know that. But having said that, we are incarnated. We are in the body. Yes. And unless we're going to say we're here to have a spiritual experience and everything around us is sacred, apart from our bodies, and that somehow is not sacred, that somehow we can cut off, that we don't need to look at, that doesn't need to be part of our personal development program. I mean, what sort of nonsense is this? And I know women who've decided independently that they want to be celibate. You know, they haven't consulted their husband on this. They just decided that from now on it's a celibate path. And, do you think, you know, they're missing out. You know, there's a lot. This news just out, you know, pleasure is pleasurable. We've been given a body. We've been given an incarnated body. I mean, you never have a cat and not stroke it, would you?
No.
You know, and yet you get couples where the sex has broken down, and so there isn't even an expression of tenderness and affection and touch and love, and all that goes because the high-flying, we can't have multi-orgasmic sex like in the porn thing goes. And so all these problems are just not because the people don't know a path forward. But obviously, we've got so much to talk about. We could go on for hours on this one.
We could. I've just a couple more questions, actually.
Okay.
I think on a serious note,
yes.
If you've tried a lot of workshops, and for people who are inspired to do the same, if they don't actually have any personal recommendations about where to go, if you're looking for
sexuality specifically,
yes.
Well, I'd say read my book and email me. I mean, I'm ridiculous. I just reply to every single person that gets in touch with me.
Well, that's wonderful, because it's sometimes hard to discern who are authentic.
I mean, or take personal recommendations from friends.
Yes.
But I mean, you know, don't go online and Google tantric master and go along to the first person that you meet, or the experience that you have might not be quite what you were expecting.
Yes, that's what I was going to get at. So I'm glad that you said.
I mean, there was one when I was actually looking to find a tantra teacher, and it said, you know, that he would warmify the room, and that the meeting would involve a wine ritual or something. I thought, oh yes, he'd warmify the room and there'd be alcohol. I don't think that's the one I want. But you know, but no, obviously personal recommendation is huge.
Okay. Well, Isabel, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I think it's a hugely enjoyable book, but really informative as well. And
Thank you.
I hope you have a great deal of
Sensation, and please go to Waterstones.
Yes. So here we are. This is Sensation by Isabel Losada, and go out and buy it. It's wonderful. Thanks very much for talking to us.
Bye-bye.